Welcome to your weekly program, BelAhdan, the show that brings Muslim, gay and lesbian to living room. I know it sounds strange and for some shocking, but you know, gay marriage is really a huge issue in the United, not just in the United States, all over the world, in Canada and even South America and Brazil and all that. Not only, I mean, the Muslims are not, you know, secured or shielded out of this. It is an issue in the Muslim community, and there is an imam, you know, he is really looking into this, got involved in how you're counseling gay and lesbian Muslim here in the United States, Imam Daayiee Abdullah, and he is in Washington, D.C., has his own mosque, and he open his door to those who are been turned away from other traditional mosque or religious institution. I had a chance to meet him and have a Skype interview in his house this morning, and we'll share this interview with you. I know it's Ramadan, so we are opening up the discussion and bringing and giving him a voice to tell us how did he get involved in this and how challenging it is to deal with issue as sensitive as you know, Muslim gay marriage and other scary stories. So enjoy that interview. We'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum, and God bless you all. This organization are you know, is focusing on gay and lesbian, Muslim gay and lesbian in America, and dealing with their issues. It's not open to the public at large.
Well, no. In terms of masjid, it is focused on LGBTQ Muslims specifically, and the LGBTQ position generally. But that's that particular organization. Over the last 3 years, I have been working with an organization called Muslims for Progressive Values. And Muslim for Progressive Values is an organization that carries out 10 various principles, and it's an inclusive concept in terms that we believe inclusivity rather than exclusion based upon gender or sexual orientation or religious affiliation. So the organization MPV, I am the director of LGBTQ outreach. So I do a lot of work specifically in that arena. But as Imam of Light of Reform Mosque, MPV has a number of mosques, inclusive mosques, that is welcoming to all people, and it's inclusive in that the men and women participate in the religious service.
And when you say inclusive, so non-gay Muslim can also attend the mosque?
Of course, because okay. What happens is that within the media, there's been too much emphasis on the idea, now I'm not certain as to why, but that the concept that because it's LGBTQ, therefore it's being set apart from any other mosque. Yet the framework in which we work out of, being an inclusive mosque, is that everyone is welcome, including LGBTQ and women, for their participation, which is very different than the more orthodox mosque concept. Where
actually do for them?
Well, I consider myself an all-service imam, basically. And so any of the particular things that people would need if they were in a more orthodox mosque, I can provide those particular services: counseling, weddings, janazah prayers, various other aspects in terms of meeting with people and pastoral counseling. But also that I cover a broader spectrum in terms of who I can talk to and be able to advise in that area. There are a number of other imams who I know personally or have heard of, in which they have not been open or may not even be qualified or available to all kinds of people because they follow a more orthodox and sometimes very traditional framework in which they work out of. So it leaves a lot of people without access to them in order to deal with their day-to-day living activities.
A relationship between the homosexual community and religious institution like church. It's not an Islamic thing. It's also in other different faiths. Can you tell us a little bit about how Islam approached this issue? Is different than Christianity and Judaism and other monolithic faiths or other major faiths?
Well, actually, what you're talking about is just a traditional interpretation. It has nothing to do with the actual texts themselves. Because in actuality, when we look at the historical framework, the concept of Sodom and Gomorrah and the Lut story really is based upon the aspect of shirk. And in actuality, according to the Judaic texts and rabbinic um, discussions on it, that it was about when the Hebrew community went into Canaan. And then the Canaanites were worshipers, they had fertility cults. And therefore, many of the things in which the people did were found to be unacceptable by the Hebrews. And therefore, they were given names, and the term used abomination. And part of that quote unquote abomination had to do with the issue of that society being integrated, or people wanting to integrate into the Canaanite society, and there was an objection to it. So many of those laws are very much part of that rejection of that particular concept, or the shirk that the people participated in.
So it was just for certain time and certain group of people.
Well, yes, it was, but it was something that dealt with the issue of shirk and not dealing with the aspect of sexuality per se, because sexuality at that particular time had a different need in terms of a smaller community wanting to build itself in an agrarian situation. So the time and place called for something very different, but that did not suppose that there weren't people who were same-sex oriented at that time. And then over the centuries after that process, as Christianity picked it up, particularly at the turn of the, at the end of particularly I would say that during the time of Jesus, Sallallahu was part of the teaching aspect, coming to change the issues that had been there within the Judaic community. When Christians started reading the materials, they turned it into a sexual issue. And this was due to, in part, because of Christian standards that they believe that the body is sinful. So that's when it actually turned into that. And that seeped into the Islamic community, particularly as Muslims, Jews, and Christians and pagans lived together in the Medina as well as in Mecca. Then the ways in which the Israeliyat, which are the stories of the Bible and the Torah, were used to explain earlier texts to Muslims, many of those traditional social mores based upon certain traditional thinking got absorbed into Islam.
It seems like Islam was very good at dealing with this sensitive, critical issue by let live, and people do what in private. It's just God. That's God's work. It's not our work.
Yes, and I agree with you. That has been the way. If we look back at Islam culturally and socially, that has been the standard. But it's always been this ideal, this pristine ideal that Islam came down from into the Mecca as this perfect religion, this perfect dogma. And that's not an accurate description of it, because the Quran came down over 22 years. Therefore, it was a building up of the human spirit to deal with the challenge. And then once they were able to establish their own city-state, then they come up with these legal standards that were appropriate for the 7th century. Some of those standards were did deal with the human condition, and I put that in quotation marks, human condition of the time. And some of those human conditions exist today. And we can look backwards in terms of looking at the society and also reading the Quran to understand it. But we have to understand it for our lives today. We don't live in the 7th century community anymore. Therefore, it's important to do that. But I do want to say to you that you're correct in terms of the issue of privacy. And I believe that that is an important aspect of it. I don't promote the idea that there should be a gay parade through the mosque. That's just totally ridiculous. That would be the same thing to have a women's right parade through it, or because you're Somali versus someone who may be from Europe or whatever. It's nonsensical. But I do think that it's important that people are able to feel a sense of self-esteem about who they are without them having to feel that they are outside of the ummah, outside of the community in any way, because in many instances in my pastoral counseling and dealing with a lot of people, I find that those who are rejected tend to be better spiritual people than those who are doing the rejecting.
Mhm. I'm not talking about interpretation of a crime. I mean, you know, based on your position, it's not, homosexuality is not a crime.
That's correct.
So,
It's
so
correct.
the argument of interpretation is not even there. You know
Right.
how the four schools, the five or the four. You say five. I like five because I think we should include the Chiazin as of the fifth one, as if that's what you meant.
Yes.
So it's not even an argument because we really need to establish, you know, what is the limitation? I mean, can religion have any limitation? And I thought that's what the role of religion is, to put some boundary to human. You know, it's not all open. Let's say somebody who wants to marry his daughter or his sister, or somebody who wants to marry four, which is accepted in the Muslim world, but not accepted here. You don't see Muslims braiding to the White House or the court asking for, changing the law to marry four women.
Well,
So,
some of them do, but
yeah,
that's
I
different.
know. Yeah, but I would like to see that, So culture is very important, and also the relationship between the West and their historically their all attempts to put the Muslim on defense.
Well, I think that you're absolutely correct in terms of some of the issues that are raised, and a lot of that I believe has to do with the clash of cultures, not clash of civilizations, which has been the way in which it's been couched so frequently, and it's the clash of culture, and there are individuals who come to the West. I think most of them have a better understanding and tend to be much more open minded about a lot of different things. But then you have those who are traditionalists who find a discomfort. They come for economic stability, but then want to impose their cultural and traditional views on individuals. And I think that's where the problem stems because in many mosques, a lot of young people are unable to talk to or associate with many of the imams who come from the old country, who have no idea. And generally, they're only focused on religion. They don't have other skills, other training, or other talents, such as being a lawyer or a social worker or someone who's involved, a psychologist and things like that. So, what they do is they know religion, but they don't know anything else but religion. And within our society, we look at the intersectionality of various different aspects and how people's lives are shaped by various factors. So I agree with you on that. But I do think, just to get to a particular point, I think it's important that people understand that in my teachings and how I understand the world, particularly following Quranic uh, guidelines, because I don't believe the Quran is a rule book. I believe it's a guidance. And for people to read it and through tadabbur and to reflect upon the Quran, both in their mind and your heart, you come up with answers that relate to your particular human situation.
No.
Different kinds of men that come to mind. One, older men, and this is before Viagra, that they didn't have the vigor. They did not have the ability to maintain an erection, and so therefore they had to deal with those issues. And I've talked to women in lectures, and I've asked them how many of them have had an older man say to them, "Young lady, if I was 20 years younger," every hand goes up. So it can't be older men. And then there are men who may not have the apparatus, either due to injury or in ancient times, due to the desire because they were slaves or made eunuchs. And to the next verse, the ayah next in 24:32, the Arabic clearly states, "And marry from the single among you without designation to gender." And for me, that means that the best state for me to be involved in as a homosexual man is to be involved in a marriage with the same sex couple, but the same sex, but also do it in a marriage formulation. There should be a contract between us. We should be of proper age and proper mindset and establish that contract and to want to live together as a couple. And that to me is what meets the same standards as marriage for everybody.
I'm sure the other verses was clearly talking about homosexuality in a more clear way. But let's talk about you. You know, you are an African American. You were born here. How did you? What attracted you to? You are a convert. What attracted you to the to Islam the
Well,
most?
um, when I was studying at Beijing University, I was studying Chinese there, and some of my classmates were Uyghur Chinese from the western part of China, and they were from the area of Urumqi in Xinjiang province. And
Muslims.
yes, Muslims. And so, being classmates, because part of the day was spent in language courses, another part of the day was spent in classes with classmates because you were to use your language in learning other materials. And some of my classmates asked me, did I know anything about Islam? And I told them what I knew in terms of the Saudis coming with their Wahhabism and the Salafi points of view, and then also in terms of NOI, Nation of Islam, from the African American perspective. And they said to me, no, 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 the real Islam. And they explained to me that their people had been Muslim over more than 1,300 years, and that due to the Silk Route, travelers from the Middle East had come into China as trade.
No invasion there.
That's right. It was no invasion. And so that was how they became Muslim. And when we talked about Islam, and in particular when I asked them about the issue of homosexuality, since I was an adult and I knew that I was also homosexual, I've known that since I was young, that was the process. They told me they didn't find any problem in terms of that because they knew that part of human nature that there are people who are homosexual. And within Chinese culture, that has always been the case. There historically has been the case, so there was no problem. So that interested me more in wanting to follow through. And that's when they gave me, very nice of them, Ma, who was his name, he gave me my first Quran, and it was in Mandarin, Chinese, and Arabic. And I hadn't studied Arabic prior to that time. So I used to read it and go to the mosque there at Beijing, it's called Cow Street Mosque. And I went there, and he showed me how to do the wudu that particular day, and I went in for the khutbah, which was done both in Arabic and in Mandarin. And when I heard the Mandarin part, it made sense to me. And I said, hey, this is really something I need to continue studying. I did do so throughout that year in Beijing. And then when I went on to Taiwan for another 2.5 years to continue my Chinese studies, it was there, they have a Saudi mosque. And it was there where I saw the significant difference between the two ways in which they approached the Quran. And the Saudis were much more harsh. Their interpretation was very narrow and very limited in how they did things. And even the doors are swung wide open and anything goes, I think is an overstatement. And it's not actually that way. Now, I do marry interfaith, meaning that Muslim women, I will do their weddings to a non-Muslim man, but I also require that they have counseling. I want to make certain that they understand the probable and possible problems that may be associated with that. Sometimes there's family issues. Other times there are issues in that they don't know or understand each other's religions very clearly. So I think it's important people go in with a lot of information before they make these particular decisions. But in today's world, people are better educated. So I think they do make decisions based upon more information rather than less information. And then also the same-sex marriages as well. So I provide a full, as I said, I consider myself a full-service imam.
So, wow. Would you counsel somebody living in the United States? You know, he said, I really want to marry more than one wife. My wife is sick, or, you know, whatever the conditions are, and I just cannot do it because I live in a country that have a different interpretation and different law, and he might also be under duress as someone, gay marriage.
Well, I also someone did approach me last year asking me if I would do a marriage of that nature, and I explained to them that in America I could not do so because my license to wed, I would be violating the laws because they do not allow polygamy. But I told them, but from your cultural perspective, if you were to get married outside of the country in a place where they did permit polygamy, then they would be able to do so. But to understand, I had to put on my lawyer's hat then and say, but when you come here, the first wife will always get the spousal exemption, and the second wife, unless you establish a will for her, then she's going to always be on the second end or the lower end of receiving things based upon the goodwill of the first wife.
I mean, do you look at your is this like a calling? Do you think is this a human right issue, a gay issue, or a religious issue for
Well,
you?
my calling to this was that I was actually studying to become a sheikh and have done the type of studies that are necessary to do that. But there are times when necessity is the mother of invention, and it's because of necessity that I wind up taking on this role because it was something that was based upon me being the person at the right place at the right time, and I was qualified to be able to do that. So that's how it actually came about. Not that I was seeking to do this. That just was not my goal at the time. But being able to provide these services to people, and I do get calls from people all the time who need things done with an imam that they're accustomed to, or they've searched around to find someone to help them, and no one's available. So then they come to me. I'm just, someone is a little sad. I sort of feel a little bad in a way because I'm the imam of last resort, okay? But it does say one thing. It says that there is at least someone who understands their circumstance and can provide them with some source and sense of guidance is how to do things.
Well, Dr. Imam Abdullah, we really thank you so much for your time. I know it's not an easy task, and I'm glad I had a chance to explore some of these ideas. And as a Muslim living in the United States myself, I found it some issue. It's not really my practicing my own religions, but other issues, and so I'm glad there is a place there for people to seek you out, and for anything they just seek knowledge and understanding, and as you mentioned before, the decision eventually is theirs. You don't make decision for them.
Right. But I provide them as much information as possible, and if they have questions, respond to them in the most loving, compassionate, and merciful way, but also that there's justice there. I want to make certain that they understand that when they take these steps, they're doing so on a basis of equality, that if they're going to marry someone, that they are both on the same level of understanding. And that's the way that couples learn to respect each other, because they're both going into this on the same level and understanding their strengths and weaknesses as well.
And this is actually driven from your faith in Islam itself, that Islam has a space for homosexual and gay and men and all that. It's not.
Well, I have two comments for that. One is that Dr. Mahmoud Taha, who was an Islamic scholar, Sudanese Islamic scholar, that I read his book. I believe it's The Second Message of Islam was the title of his book. And Dr. Naeem, who's a professor of Islamic law down at Emory University, was mentored by him. He had a very important aspect. He said that when you start the basis of understanding Islam, you're like on the first floor, and you go through and learn the different aspects. But when you come back to that same spot, you're now not on the same first floor anymore. You're actually on the second floor. And then you go around again and learn more, so that as you continue to develop an understanding, it's almost like the minaret. You're going higher and higher. Mm-hmm. And as you get higher and higher, you can see more. The distance becomes, your vision expands. And as people continue to grow in knowledge, their vision should expand like a sphere of influence, and this becomes more inclusive. It's not a line of demarcation, but it's a realm of influence that you're able to understand better. And that doesn't mean that there are not things that are quote unquote haram that's on that frame, but you can then see that that line of demarcation, there are some gray areas, and the space and the depth of people, being inclusive of anyone who could become Muslim, has expanded significantly. So I think it's important. And then the other aspect of it, and is that I think everyone who seeks to understand Islam better is reading the Quran, but also spending time in meditation and knocking on the door and talking to Allah. And when Allah answers, you've had your ikra. And I think that's the way in which we can mimic.
Time there, but I can see the Ikra moment, an ebook or a digital or an iPod. I mean, people are busy with all that. How are we going to have an Ikra moment where everybody on some digital diversion somewhere? Would you see that Ikra moment coming on a Kindle or an iBook or something?
Not necessarily. I think it may be a source of information gathering, but the reality of it is that it has to be turning away from the whisper. I consider part of technology to be the whisper of shaitan. It can be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not paying attention to some of the suggestions that are there. But I think it's important that you put that stuff down and spend time in silence, time in reflection, listening to things. I think it's wonderful for people to just turn off everything, all your technology, and be quiet.
I'm about to do it right now. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll meet again. Good luck.
Well, let me know, Ahmed, when you're going to broadcast. I'd like to see it.
I will send you a link.
All right. Thank you very much.
Salam alaikum.
Salam. Ma salama.